And the left has failed because we on the left have been unable to put forward a vision that seizes the imagination and hearts, minds, and souls of people.
I agree.
Unable to have institutional capacity for that vision.
Yeah.
That
Well,
can
you
deliver.
do it. You're the one we look to, Cornell. You do it.
But when you have such a weak and feeble civic soul craft, and so personal liberty becomes licentiousness, selfishness. I don't care about public life. I don't care about common good. I just care about myself.
All right. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my latest rant. This one is going to be on Lisa Featherstone and why the left should care about men, with Anna Kasparian in Jacobin. I'm just going to assume that you've already watched it. This is just more empty rhetoric that makes it understandable why people vote for the right wing. Okay, the left exists in such a safe space today. Their safe space is actually this ideological, polarized echo chamber, citational polarized echo chamber. I mean, even if you read academic citations, it's just another reminder why the left has so enclosed itself. Even this progressive left, even when Anna says that woke culture is killing the left, they don't actually go out and see and listen to what the right wing people are saying, or supposedly right wing people. It's interesting that the right wing is anti neoliberal, almost more anti neoliberal than the left is today. That's what's really kind of scary and dangerous. So even the academic citations are stuck within this polarized echo chamber. Even the academic citations are within an echo chamber. And this is why nobody trusts the universities. No men want to go into university unless they're taking STEM courses. Why the whole discipline of the humanities has just become a piece of shit, and nobody gives a shit what the humanities has to say, because they don't actually listen to people that they disagree with. We have to be empathetic towards the Nazi that is residing deep within us. And if we can't deal with the Nazi that's inside of us, then how do we expect the Nazis themselves to deal with their own Nazism? Right? So what we've been doing is kind of blaming toxicity on the other when we haven't really taken on the toxicity that exists within ourselves. And I don't even know why we're having this conversation, because even socialist feminists have said that they don't care about men. So it's almost like, oh, why should I even be having this conversation? But I mean, I do believe in the public sphere, and I do believe in hopefully an idea of progress. And I do see that if we don't take and we don't talk about these issues, then things are going to get much worse. So one of the things that I've learned from Christianity, and one of the reasons I kind of disagree with it now, is this idea of what would Jesus do? And this idea of the power of the scapegoat, and how Jesus was supposedly the last scapegoat. But I've noticed that we live in a society where lots of people are paying for other people's sins. Our whole judicial system is like this. The people who, for example, are confessional, the people who are honest, they go to jail, like Julian Assange, while the people who are the most evil, they pay their way and they go out of the system. They don't have to participate in the judicial system like the rest of us do. So it's really what the left is experiencing is, again, the problem of the dirty hands argument. The problem of dirty hands concerns whether political leaders and those in similar positions can ever be justified in committing even gravely immoral actions when dirtying their hands is in a way necessary for realizing some moral or political end, some important moral or political end, such as the preservation of a community's continued existence or the prevention of imminent societal catastrophe. Now, this is the nice way of putting the dirty hands argument, but it gets a lot dirtier in terms of your ability to win at the system is already part of the capitalist game. So this is the reason why we have people like Carrie Bourassa, the person who lied about their native heritage when they were actually from Russia. This isn't just a one-off thing. This is a normal thing in our society right now. If socialist feminists, if there are any that give a fuck about men, then perhaps these 16 or 17 points that I'm about to make can be a part of what they're doing. They can consider these 17 points. Number one is stop censorship and stop platforming strawmen. When you Google critique of feminist jurisprudence and you can't find anything, that's a problem. And then the other problem is that people platform strawmen as well. So, for example, people say that cancel culture is a problem, and other people come and say, well, is cancel culture getting called out on Twitter? No, cancel culture is not getting called out on Twitter. It's not even being able to search the proper information on Google. That's cancel culture. It's even before this idea of free speech. But you see how when censorship becomes the norm, platforming strawmen also becomes the norm to try to curate our experiences as human beings. This kind of patronizing curation that's being committed right now. If there was one thing that the internet was amazing about, was this idea of freedom of speech, and that's why we had something called the Barbara effect. Today, Barbara Streisand had the last laugh today. So I would love it if actually South Park did a modern day version of Barbara Streisand, okay? Where now regulation is the norm, and we can see a lot of these left-wing arguments can be used against the situation of Julian Assange right now, which is what I really want to talk about. So number two, realize their own complicity within neoliberalism by moralizing the commodification of emotional labor. When you turn, and this was what my Butler video was about, when you make John Stuart Mill your highest ideal, that guy was a capitalist, right? If you turn all of our interpersonal relationships into a cost-benefit analysis, white supremacy wins. When you turn all of this, when you make hesitation the norm, the only people that hesitate are the people that are not narcissists, are the people that are not sociopaths. And the sociopaths and narcissists, they win. That's what I mean by the dirty hands argument. Number three, create some understanding of what feminine honor would look like instead of normalizing neoliberal idioms like, I don't owe you anything. When we have an I don't owe you anything culture, why would any man support their tax money going into supposedly female healthcare like abortion? Why would any man support that when we live in a culture of I don't owe you anything? If we live in a culture of I don't owe you anything and it's too much emotional labor to educate you, these idioms that have been normalized by feminists, then is it any surprise that men don't want to be supporting? Let's just be a little bit consistent. Number four, we need to give up affirmative action and power equals privilege politics that maintain racist, noble, savage narratives. You can look at my other video for that. Number five, stop censorship through Google and Reddit. Try Googling critique of feminism on Google. You can't find anything. Everything is so curated. Okay, it's so disgusting. It's really, it's impotent. It's female impotence is disgusting. It's worse than incels, right? It's the same as incels. Okay, that's why I think that those people are really on the same boat. Number six, address carceral feminism, which ironically paints itself as intersectional. carceral feminism, the Duluth model, all of these men who are in prison, you have to understand that carceral feminism and neoliberalism are allied. That neoliberal feminism is the norm. That neoliberal feminism spreads itself through these idioms and paints itself as a Marxist Engelsian perspective, when really it's just this disgusting inability to take up responsibility. Number 7, realize that judging a man based on his income is a form of objectification rather than platforming straw men like the male feminists do on Reddit menslib. Okay, so if you go to the Reddit menslib, I used to be part of these movements, right? The biggest form of objectification that they recognize. So objectification means is treating somebody else as a means to an end, or as a means to an end, not as an end in themselves. Okay, that's the number 1 definition of objectification. However, feminists have gone and made a bunch of qualifications to that and basically excluded the male perspective and only bring in this form of sexualization, form of objectification. But that's not really the kind of objectification that men face. Any man can go and lift a few weights and get a couple muscles. It's not that difficult. Okay, I don't know what some people are arguing, but you know, you can get, it's not that difficult to make yourself look okay. Okay, that's not the real point that men deal with. Even ugly men with money and muscles can get laid. That's not really the point. What really is the point is this way more harsh form of objectification, right? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So you can use poetry, you can use words, you can use roses to, make any ugly person a little bit more beautiful. But the problem really is that there's a much harsher form of objectification that's a really objective number figure, and that's how thick your wallet is. And that form of objectification, that is much more concerning for men. This guy on another Reddit forum posted, should I take this garbage man job or girls won't date me? Yeah, you have to lie. You have to say I'm in waste management. You have to do all this bullshit around your career, especially at this time when we have economic problems. Before I continue, there was this article called "Why Won't Woke Men or Why Won't Leftist Men Date Prostitutes?" Excuse me, that doesn't. I mean, this kind of ridiculous argument can only be made when you create a safe space for yourself, full of privilege, where there's no responsibility, where there's no critique. This kind of narcissistic argument can only be made from the perspective of incredible narcissism. And it's probably not even about your sex work. It's about this mentality. There was this clip of these women talking about Hassan and how Hassan is defending sex work. Hassan is such a level 1, such a dumbass fucking male feminist. He's not really well read at all. He's just a talking point for these idioms, right? So, and he's a good looking guy, so he has no idea really what he's saying. He's a what's the male bimbo? Himbo. He's a himbo. And because he's a himbo and he says stupid shit, he goes up the rankings in terms of these public idioms that everybody says. And these women are like, look, sex work isn't good for us, isn't good for women. But he doesn't listen to that. He listens to the narcissist women instead.
Hassan actually loves women and he really supports sex work and he thinks it should be normalized on any platform, when I would prefer it to not be. Like, I support sex work, but I would just prefer it not to be normalized on the platform that I'm on. I think there's a time and a place or whatever. And so it's funny because Hassan kept saying to us, like, it doesn't affect women. And I would tell him, I would keep telling him, I'd be like, well, this is how it affects me directly.
As a woman.
I am woman.
And Hassan was like, no.
He'd be like, no. And I was like, Hassan. And then in comes Myth and Connor.
No, it wasn't Myth.
Okay, in comes Connor.
And Connor's already apologized.
Yeah, he has apologized, I will say. But in comes Connor, listening to us very intently, by the way, and then going to Hassan and say, what she's saying is, and I was like, Connor! Stop! Like, it was, oh my god. I literally got to the point where I said, okay, we're done talking about this, we're going nowhere. And then they kept talking about it. I said, no, seriously, we are done. And then they talked about it again. I was like, no, we are done. We're done.
And if sex work was real work, then would we have, for example, in our high schools today, we have the military recruiting young men at the age of 18 to go and not only die for their country, but kill for their country, are expected to put their lives on the line for their country at the age of 18. So is it okay if we have OnlyFans put up a booth next to the military industrial complex booth where they recruit women for sex work? Nobody likes this. So it's really funny how you're in a damned if you do and damned if you don't situation if you're a male feminist. You're always in that position. And it only takes, I've been a male feminist for a very long time, and every male feminist has a point in time. It's not just it has a point in time in which they're like, fuck this shit, I'm leaving this movement. It's going to happen to Hassan at some point. But the reason why it might not happen to Hassan is because he has already so much social capital from this world that he will never really be in a position to really critically assess his position. Number 8, stop saying societal expectations and take responsibility and call it female expectations on men. Gay men are doing just fine. I mean, if you look at the gay men rates in terms of graduating university, they're doing fine. It's straight men who are having a problem, right? So is there a societal prejudice on bi men? No, there isn't a societal prejudice on bi men. It's a feminine prejudice on bi men. How do I know this? The prejudice comes strictly from one group of people. Remember, when so-called intersectional feminists were trying to single-handedly take out the B in LGBTQ, that happened. That was happening. If you were paying attention, they were trying to take out the B in LGBTQ because it was a binary statement. Number 9, men don't create a narrow definition of masculinity, women do, and they impose this definition on us. Men are fine with our definition of masculinity. We're fine with whatever that means. We like our sports games. There's no problem. There's no crisis of masculinity. It's not a crisis of masculinity at all. The problem is that feminists, in their representational logic, they impose their feminist ideals within masculine spaces. So you're trying to watch a game, soccer game, and so you have to have a woman in the panel of discussion, or women need to start watching their own sports teams. But do women watch the WNBA? I mean, actually, a lot of men. I think there's probably more men that watch women's sports than women do, right? I mean, but instead they impose themselves onto male spaces because of this representational logic, because of this prescriptive intersectionality, this evil prescriptive intersectionality that reinforces racism from the back door. Because the reason why it does that is because women are told that, these are certain people with privileges. White men have privileges. All the women are also told that you should be dating a man of privilege, right? You shouldn't settle for less. So these are all the people with privileges, and they should be self-critical about their privileges. But fucking bullshit, right? Number 10, I don't owe you anything culture, and it's too much emotional labor to educate you culture created by feminists killed the idea of collective purpose. There is no collective purpose because the feminists divided everything into a John Stuart Mill calculation that makes the sociopaths win, that makes the sociopaths get laid the most. Okay, I've been in situations where I've had amazing truthful, awesome conversations with women at a bar, and they ask me like, "What do you do?" I'm like, "Oh, well, I'm a teacher." "Oh, you're a teacher? Hmm." And then the conversation ends because they realize that my salary is not high enough. I've also been in a situation where I've worn a fairly expensive watch, not trying at all, in a bar situation, and I've gotten laid. I mean, this kind of inability to take responsibility is so disgusting. It's so, and even sexually successful men are tired of this crap. Man, my life became a lot better when I realized that feminists are just not going to take responsibility for creating these public idioms. And until they do, until they continue to not take responsibility, we're not going anywhere as a progressive movement. Okay? Stop vicarious traumatization, number 11. This vicarious traumatization that's happening with regards to models of abuse. When you control the definition of abuse, then of course you can have, when you control the definition of abuse, then there's no conversation to be had. When the Duluth model is the norm for dealing with men who are going through a carceral feminist system, you have to understand that carceral feminism and neoliberalism are allied. That neoliberal feminism is the norm. That neoliberal feminism spreads itself through these idioms and paints itself as a Marxist Engelsian perspective, when really it's just this disgusting inability to take up responsibility. Again, when you control the definition over what abuse means, it's quite easy to find statistics where every relationship is abuse, where every relationship is rape. And then warning other women about this and creating a society of don't talk to strangers. Okay, yes, we all agree with trans rights. We all agree with, rape is bad. But when you don't realize like the basic Freudian things, that we don't know what we want to sleep with our mothers and our fathers, like all of these difficulties of human subjectivity, and just being like, no means no, yes means no, yes, all this crap. I mean, come on, give some credence to the difficulties of being a human. Okay. And what's happened instead is that the most traumatized people, the most vocal, the most traumatized people, and thereby the most narcissistic people, they get the biggest voice and the loudest voice in the media now because of this representation culture. Okay. Number 12, they say we have to increase mental health resources for men, but what man wants to go through mental health resources when it's controlled by the American Psychological Association, which is so openly neoliberal and so openly biased towards men? The discipline of intersectional psychology can go fuck itself, okay? 13, green things are gendered. I mean, this is another example of platforming strawman. Who says being green is is sissy? This is, again, another example of when you just live in this polarized echo chamber. Nobody thinks, not the left nor the right, thinks being green is sissy. Everybody has this aspiration of going and opening up a tiny home with, even the right-wing people have this aspiration. Lots of right-wing people have this aspiration of going to, the forest, living in the forest, and, farming or whatever, and surviving off of hunting. Dude, nobody thinks being green is sissy. But the fact that you think so, all it does is reinforce the fact that you live in the polarized echo chamber safe space, and you platform strawman, not only in your own mind, but around the people who agree with you, that you surround yourself with. Okay? Men, on the other hand, realize that they need to be loved, okay? And they are only loved for their utility. And as such, they need to exploit surplus labor and maximize economies of scale, which is not green. Okay, so they've realized that in order to make money, in order to be successful in the romance game, they need to have a thick wallet. And as a result, to have a thick wallet in our society means to be not environmentally friendly. Okay, it's so basic.
So that you cannot have sexual emancipation without addressing class structures.
Licentiousness.
But the amount of mental topsy-turvy that we have to do now, because we live in this politically correct world and we just can't just say what's right in front of us, okay? And so the conversation is, we need a better and more convincing message for mass politics. Mass politics is already doing what it needs to be done. Okay, you people that aren't listening are the problem.
It's a way of not listening. I'm thinking they're not listening.
You send proclamations from your ivory towers, as with all academia today. Okay. 14. Russia and China are not paranoia. This is a very disappointing point. Okay, Putin is not a joke. Xi Jinping is not a joke. Totalitarianism is not a joke. Okay, these are not democratic. These are strictly not democratic powers. It's not the right-wing military-industrial complex bullshit that we're talking about. On the other hand, they just had a summit for democracy, and Venezuela, and Democracy Now! Talks about it. Venezuela is in a precarious situation. They bring the other candidate of Venezuela. So it's not like the West is totally consistent in this democracy aspect as well. It's an empire in itself, just because of the Venezuela thing that we can see is that the West is totally an empire in itself. But it's, at the end of the day, it's much more of a democratic empire than either China or Russia, which are straight up mafia. 15. Stop saying that men are too much emotional labor, when it's clearly men who are paying for what Cornel West recently said is licentiousness. I mean, Cornel West has to use these great big words like licentiousness to get around the political correctness crap. It's a perfect word. I'm going to keep using it. Women are the ones who are actually too much emotional labor when it comes to their past licentiousness. Okay, men are the ones who have to pay for this overwhelming emotional labor that women are causing them. Okay, when it comes to actually being able to develop long-lasting relationships.
But when you have such a weak and feeble civic soulcraft, and so personal liberty becomes licentiousness, selfishness. I don't care about public life. I don't care about common good. I just care about myself.
Licentiousness is killing it, okay? Just the reason why men retreat to the technological trance of video games and porn. Let's at least both sides admit some complicity, but only men do, because there's a whole army of gaslighting male feminists that are drafted in colleges, that are going through this brainwashing process in colleges, and not just in colleges, but in the corporate world and everything. Okay, where not only that, but your social capital is tied to your ability to speak freely about these issues. And then they say, oh, well, men can't talk freely. Oh, well, I wonder why men can't talk freely when your social capital is attached to your ability to speak. And then they say, oh, men have a problem with expressing themselves. Men don't have a problem with expressing themselves. What is Shakespeare? I mean, Mark Antony's speech after Caesar's death. How much more emotional labor can you get? Male emotional labor is within the public sphere, is caring about these group projects. And because there's no males speaking, there's no such thing as group project anymore, because the group project requires us to take responsibility for our individual licentiousness. Number 16, taking and leaving the question of equality only when it benefits women. I'm going to use this as an example. I know that Biden is not on the left, but I'm going to use this example of Biden as just a analogy for a bigger problem. So after many months of Biden posturing and pandering about women being in the army with really dumb maternal combat suits and everything, at the end of the day, women got to dodge the draft. Okay? Who is going to have to spill blood for defending democracy at the end of the day? So another issue is women police, right? And this is the insanity of the whole situation. They did a study about how when women go to a policing situation versus when men go to a policing situation, there's much less of a result, much less likely that there being a violent conclusion to the situation that they're sent to. But they don't actually, and this is actually an actual study that's been done. And then there was another study or another critique of that study where it showed that no, wait, actually, it's because police departments don't send their women into situations that are likely to be violent. But this first study had no problem with just outright saying, look, when women are sent into situations, it's much less of a violent situation because it's women. Excuse me. Again, these selective citations, this inability to take on the emotional labor that's required to look outside of your own worldview. And the other thing that I want to say about emotional labor is that this performativity is not emotional labor. Performativity is not emotional labor. Emotional labor is actually sitting there and actually feeling empathetic. But we can see how insane this emotional labor literature is with regards to performativity, and analyzing performativity as a form of emotional labor. It's a perspective that can only be created from an intense form of narcissism. And the other guy talks about it, how the narcissism literature itself has been taken over by narcissists. That's this insane version of this dirty hands argument. So don't expect men to, put their life on the line to protect against Xi Jinping and Putin when shit goes down. Okay, I'm not defending militarism. Okay, but there was a time. What does the patriarchy mean? The patriarchy means that you have to put your life on the line. As a man, you're expected to put your life on the line. That's the only way you get a vote in the democracy. Okay, you have property, you have investment within the community, and your ability to put your life on the line. Okay, that's why women didn't get the vote. It's not because, there was also the extra misogyny, but in the very first place, it wasn't a misogynistic thing. It was the fact that men can put their life on the line. That's what gets them a vote in the agora, in the public sphere. Okay, but we don't talk about that patriarchy. The patriarchy we talked about is all men are better than all women, something like this kind of, again, platformed straw man version of everything, right? So the point is that there is no real equality because women don't actually take up the responsibility portion of this equality. Then they create these ideological worlds like platforming straw men and censoring whatever they can't critique and responding to these ideological worlds that are too easy to refute. So they say, oh, being green is sissy. Nobody says being green is sissy, okay? There's so many of these platform strawmen, and it's just impossible to keep track. There's just no critical thinking. So they respond to these ideological worlds that are way too easy to refute, and then they say men are the problem, so much so that the APA has clinicalized masculinity. And this clinicalization of masculinity has judicial consequences and it has pharmaceutical consequences as well. So now we're giving pills to all these boys, the ADHD pills, because they can't sit still in class, rather than giving men ways to become men, giving men the ways to have a right of ritual, the ritualistic rights. But we've taken away ritualistic rights from men. We've invaded the male locker room where we used to have a lot of fun in the male locker room. I saw my old friends the other day from elementary or whatever, and we're just like, oh, remember when we used to have like towel fights in the male locker room? Those were fun. Okay, and it doesn't matter who gets bullied. I mean, there is an equalizing process in the creation of brotherhood. There's always a equalizing process. The brotherhood, in terms of how men see each other, you see a working class man, you see a rich man. These guys, they have so much more class solidarity in terms of brotherhood than do classist women who look at the garbage man, okay, that will never date a garbage man, okay. The pizza man and the garbage man, when they see each other, they say, yo, what up, bro, all this stuff. But do you see that with women? No, women never do that, okay. Yeah, now there's some idea of sisterhood, but it's a sisterhood in, what is this? It's a sisterhood in licentiousness, okay. It's not a class, it's not a class analysis. So the patriarchy does not put all men at the top. The patriarchy puts a certain group of men, the fathers, at the top, and all women are placed on a pedestal to be protected underneath the fathers. And then the vast majority of men, I would say 80-60% of men, are the cannon fodder. Okay, that's what the patriarchy is. It's not all men are better than all women. It's 20% of men, all the women, and then the rest of men. That's what the patriarchy is. Okay, that's what the patriarchy has always been. If you want equality, you need to get off your patriarchal pedestal completely and not use it when it's convenient. And so this kind of hypocrisy on the progressive side of things, where, you know, women are like, oh, well, I want a traditional man now that I've been licentious for so long. Now I want a traditional man who will take care of me. I mean, this is fucking ridiculous. Okay. And you know, the funny thing is that even sexually successful men are tired of this crap. I know firsthand. Okay. Even sexually successful men are tired of this. Okay. And nobody wants to commit anymore. Why would a sexually successful man commit in this time? No, why would he? He can go on Tinder, boom, boom, boom. There's no reason for him to commit. And so at the end of the day, we need to realize that intersectionality is nothing revolutionary. Okay, intersectionality is integral to the logic of neoliberal colonialism. And if we don't realize this, that intersectionality comes out of a certain tradition, and that tradition comes out of an Enlightenment kind of tradition, if we don't realize that intersectionality is within that liberal tradition, and it's nothing revolutionary, and especially when we go to third world countries and impose our Western ideals of individual autonomy, our Western ideals of intersectionality, our Western ideals of human rights, and we destroy these traditional cultures, these traditional languages in favor of Anglo English, then there's no progressive culture that we can make. And that's basically what my whole ideal of cyberpunk is all about, where because people aren't able to take up that responsibility, I don't expect anybody to take up that responsibility these days. That's why I'm so chill about all this, is that, just give up on the fact that anybody's going to take responsibility. Okay, that there's going to be any type of cultural idiom of honor for feminists. When women start saying like, it's our responsibility, instead of saying it's too much emotional labor, or I don't owe you anything. Instead, imagine if there was some sort of ideal of feminine honor. When there's an ideal of feminine honor, yeah, we can. But I want to end with these pictures of after World War II, where French women would, or during World War II, when French women would sleep with Nazis in order to get ahead in the Vichy France society. And after the World War II ended, they were finally held to account for their bullshit, right? If that happened, but then there's this article that's being empathetic to the French women who could have decided not to sleep with Nazis, not to try to get ahead in the Nazi world with the Vichy feminists while the Nazis were winning World War II. Those opportunistic women, if we can't hold them to account, there's nothing that we can do in our society. So good luck, Anna, and all you socialist feminists who are working towards a better world. And you know, one of the scariest things is that instead of taking on these difficult to have conversations, seeing the Nazi within ourselves and having an empathetic perspective towards our own Nazi that lives within us, instead of dealing with that, they are doing the opposite, which is they say, oh, we need to raise our men in a certain way. Look, I was raised as a male feminist and I turned out like this, okay? So I know 100%, okay, that any man you raise in your matrix, they're gonna get red pilled at some point or another. So stop, okay? It's just, it doesn't work at all. And the first thing we need to do is to dismantle these male feminist circles like Men's Liberation, okay, that are just brainwashing students en masse. It's really disgusting. And you know, I was one of them, and that's one of my main goals here, is to try to get to those men who you know, it's terrible what they do. It's worse. It's just like how, you know, different religions, they try to impose their worldview on these people rather than give them actual critical thinking skills, right? And it's explicitly within feminist culture to do this. They say that, and the reason why they say that is because Foucault, in Foucault Against Himself. So in this book, Foucault Against Himself, Geoffrey de Lagancière is getting questioned, right, about Foucault being against himself on this subject of the personalist political kind of. Would you say that psychiatry is a body of knowledge that can only exist within a certain exercise of power? In the classical tradition, when we think about knowledge, we always set it and its truth against the political, the vested interests, the normative, etc. One of the ways to disqualify a body of knowledge, or the idea that a statement or a proposition constitutes knowledge, is to argue that the statement or proposition is political, vested, or normative. This is the right-wing argument of virtue signaling that really needs to be taken account. And they say, and this is Geoffrey's understanding of Foucault, which I think is a limited understanding of Foucault, where he says the very subtle idea that Foucault defends in Madness and Civilization and in The Order of Things and The Will to Knowledge is that we can retain the idea that something is true, but at the same time accept that it's vested historical and political interests. So we can do both. In fact, because a body of knowledge presupposes a certain number of constructions of objects, that these objects that call for us to study them are received by us from the outside, such that they were constituted by procedures of power and control mechanisms. In this way, this knowledge, but because we are dealing with knowledge, we know it is political knowledge. That's how Foucault can speak of a politics of truth. Okay, so we always have a vested interest within our philosophical statements. That's what feminism is all about. But the problem here is that feminism goes way too much invested in this argument, such that they actually do feminist historical revisionism to such an extent that it's not just a work of fiction that's striving towards a political goal. It becomes a self-reinforcing ideological religion in a way, right? And the problem with it is, if this religion was open to being critiqued, like the exegetical situation of Abraham, like the biblical traditions, where there's always some sort of exegetical analysis, interpretation, this process would be fine. But the problem is that they actually go out and do the extra step of stopping people from criticizing the fact that they have these vested interests, right? And then they create a whole swath, a whole portion of undergrads that on Twitter are just blah, 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 blah. Like, it's really insane, this theology that we're living in. And I feel like I'm, one of these heretical, that's why you feel heretical when you are challenging anything like this. So Foucault's idea about vested interests and politics and philosophy statements as being one and the same, okay, that exists, but it goes way too far, especially when it's not allowed to be critiqued. He talks about how the political position is always within a philosophical position, so that you have to, there's no separating the political from the personal, in a way. That's how they put it. But in a way that doesn't become the case. The political doesn't become personal. The personal becomes pure capitalism when you're doing that. If the personal became political, that would be amazing. But that's not what happens in our world. Okay, I hope that you understood that point, and thank you for taking the time to pay attention to this.
You gotta get off the bus and walk. It's real talk. Real talk, that was a silly movement.